This is all about making some stuff. So, I made some stuff, and it's available places. So, check it out. Thanks. This is one of them, by the way. I actually did that without saying that, but yeah. There's a thing by me under here. Welcome to the Enter the Stuinverse podcast. It is January 28th. I hope everybody is doing well. I know I'm still figuring this out myself, so let's figure this out together. I know I think a lot I come across as kind of depressing, which is not my goal. I know I've debated happiness a lot, but I think taking the little moments that you can get and sort of cherishing them, or finding joy in something small, that ultimately adds up in your sort of happiness bank account, for lack of a better term. So finding little things that bring you joy is important. I know after the last episode with Brandon Quigg, which, check it out, that's the best episode of this podcast yet, so check it out if you haven't. I started going to the Vinyl Frontier in Carrollton, Georgia. Great place, a lot more, and sort of just finally diving into the whole vinyl thing. Never been a vinyl guy before, but it's crazy how seeing it's a dumb thing to get excited about, but I know they had a copy of Alien by Strapping Young Lad, and I remember getting so excited and looking at it every time I would go in there, because I would periodically sort of stop in and I would look at it every time, and I finally pulled the trigger, and it's so nostalgic to do that. I remember getting that album as a souvenir on the last vacation, like family vacation that I did with my parents back in, God, it was right after the New Black came out, which had been out a year or so, maybe 2007 or so. And I had my LimeWire copy of the New Black that I listened to the entire way to Tybee Island. And I remember they told me I could pick out a souvenir, and what I picked out was Alien by Strapping Young Lad. I know I was at that point familiar with the music video for Love being Evil Dead inspired, and having just found that movie and really loving it, and seeing that music video inspired by that, it was like the perfect alignment of events and timing to where it drew me toward that band further. And I remember getting Alien, and much to my parents' dismay, like putting it in the CD player after I purchased it at a FYE in Tybee Island, and Imperial comes on, which is just fucking chaos. It's still to this day, I don't know if much compares to how fucking chaotic that album is, which is one of the reasons I sort of still revisit it, is just, it's still this weird anomaly. But I remember hating it, actually, because you really, in a way, have to train your ears to unclusterfuck those sounds. And it's so dense and loud, and everything is happening at the same time, and it's overwhelming, and I hated it. But except, like, Love kind of has the poppy sort of chorus inspired by City of Love by Yes. But I dug that, and over time I just sort of fell in love with it more. But a memory that will always stay with me is being in a hotel room in Tybee Island, laying there late at night with my little portable CD player and listening to this to try and make sense of it, because it was purchased, so the whole like skipping stuff or thumbs down on streaming didn't really apply at that time, and I wanted to, I guess, get my money's worth out of it, or my parents' money's worth out of it. And 2 weeks coming on, which is such a departure from the rest of that album. Very Floridian, sort of. The Baby Blue section of that very much reminds me of the Thin Ice off Pink Floyd's The Wall. And being a huge Pink Floyd fan at the time, and the way those vocals lined up, it was a very cool moment that experiencing that for the first time just stands out to me. And looking through vinyl, I wonder how nostalgia based it is for me, mixed with I just like having physical copies of stuff. I know that was kind of my weird way of saying that I might turn the record collecting side of things into like a weekly unboxing thing on YouTube, maybe, where I film it. I've got some stuff that some of it I've opened, one I have not. I think doing a live unboxing of that would be really cool. I really like hearing people talk about albums that they enjoy and the experience of hearing them for the first time. So as crowd participation as well, if anybody listens to this and has an experience of discovering an album for the first time, if you would write in and describe that, I would actually like to read that. And if it's okay with the sender, read it on the podcast, because I like hearing those types of things, even if it's not my preferred style. I think the older you get, the more you can appreciate things out of your own little line of trees. I know this week in local music, Silly Goose, an Atlanta-based band, released Bad Habits, which I listened to, and it's not my thing. It's very Limp Bizkit inspired, but there are some very cool riffs, very funny, sort of takes you back type moments. It's a very awesome, well made piece of work. It's not a full record, it's an EP, but that is available at the Vinyl Frontier for $20 right now. I'm going to promote them a lot just because it's a cool place. I like surrounding myself with that kind of thing. But kudos to Silly Goose for making that. It's a good piece of work, even though it's not particularly my thing. I know this week David Lynch passed away, which, again, buying some of these albums and kind of reflecting on things in general, David Lynch made such a huge impact, not just in movies, but what he inspired. I mean, obviously, if you listen to Kevin Smith talk about his beginnings, Eraserhead and Twin Peaks were his jams, and that inspired him to make all of his movies, which inspired him to make a podcast, which I listened to for years, and that inspired me to do this. So there's that, and the influence on people like Mike Patton of Faith No More and Mr. Bungle, and those early albums being such like a huge influence on Dev, who became my favorite artist. So in a weird way, if you trace these blueprints, David Lynch made this incredible ripple. And what I think is important to take from David Lynch's life and work and just his personality, the way he carried himself, was to be open and free-flowing and unafraid of the ideas that you have, creatively speaking, and just make what feels right. He was very intuitive based, it seemed, and he was the one of the first ones to really stand up and advocate for that. So I think in terms of creativity, which is the creative process to me, is just becoming really fascinating, and I think it always has been. I know there's two types of people out there: people who love listening to interviews and people talk about that kind of thing, and those who don't. And growing up, it's every album that came out, I had to seek out every interview involved with it. The older I get, the less I just have time for it. But I find that kind of thing fascinating. Like, picking the brains of people who made stuff is probably more fascinating than the sort of technical, mechanical side of music, at least. So more so than figuring out how they made the sounds, it's how did they come to the point to where they were making the sound, sort of like the psychology of it. And I find the older I get, the more I think about the link between our psychology and what we listen to, for me anyway. And it's just things that I kind of find fascinating, and seeing how people come to the ideas that they produce is interesting. And I'm going to do, just for shits and giggles here, which, by the way, what does that expression mean? Shits and giggles. Wouldn't that be the opposite way? Wouldn't you giggle and that make you shit? Anyway, beside the point. And speaking of points, I set out to do a full David Lynch tribute type podcast, but putting that out and naming it something felt like it would be done for the sake of listens. Like, you see that and you click on it, and it seems very sort of morally not okay to capitalize on the passing of somebody like that. And David Lynch did mean a great deal to me, and still does. I mean, Twin Peaks is one of my favorite things of all time. Just not just in terms of TV or cinema. It's one of my favorite pieces of media that's ever existed. I love most things about Twin Peaks. The soap opera aspects, it's over time with age, I appreciate it more. That sort of breaking up of the weird surrealness. I think finding a balance is pretty important. And also, I was working on something, and at the end of everything, when I record all the instruments for something, I like to go back in and add a bunch of just weird ambient layers because I like noise. I really like noise, I've come to find. But one of the sounds I accidentally made by a reverb delay mix tail just sounded like it would be an Eraserhead, like that empty sort of sounds like the air is being sucked out vacuum type sound. And I put it under something. And the reason I left it and did it the way I did was because Eraserhead, because I love that movie. I think it's well made. It's comical in a sense. But yeah, I mean, David Lynch just made a huge impact on me, and I would like to pay tribute to him in saying these words that more so than the output itself, what he stood for and what he advocated in terms of creative bravery changed the course of perhaps all media in some way, because he did things in such a way that the term Lynchian became a term. So, R.I.P. David Lynch, although at his age, I think it was 78. 78's a hell of a life. 78's probably longer than I realistically want to stick around for, not to sound morbid, but that's a long time. It's your body degrades. Like, ideally, I would like to check out right before things get shitty. So, well, maybe not right before, because my knees always sound like somebody's eating Pop Rocks, but that's beside the point. For shits and gigs, back to that, I'm going to insert what I have as an idea for potentially an album intro, and I'll kind of talk about it a little. So I will edit that in here now just to give the show some life. So this is an idea that I've sort of started with that led into an old riff that I've had for quite some time. But the very beginning of this, I remember years ago a cicada had got in our house, and I recorded the cicada, and I threw that in here. Also, I think standing outside in my driveway one night, I also recorded the ambient sound of that. I really like just taking moments and just kind of recording them just for the sake of it and dropping them in things to give it texture. There's some samples that I've modulated that I'm not sure if I should say for legality, I guess, but they're samples from TV shows and a movie that have been warped in ways that you can no longer tell what they are, but the sentiments of which are something that were kind of on my mind at the time that I started working on this. This part was just kind of a improv thing that I just kind of did, very ambient and spacey, and it seemed like it would be a neat intro, so there it is. And then it goes into an old idea here in a second, but I think what was on my mind the most while I was kind of working on this, or still working on this, is so the notion of taking specifically love and the idea of love and over the years, I kind of start to question myself as I do with a lot of things. The way in which I've loved in general has probably not been correct. And I think in some ways it's about identifying that and sort of picking apart the good and removing the bad. And a concept that I've kind of tried to adopt in my own world in terms of love. And I'm not speaking just like romantically, which is people often immediately go to that when they hear love, but in general, I think a goal of mine personally, just as a human being, is to try and unlearn everything that I know about love. It's the opposite of I want to know what love is. I don't want to know what love is. Because the idea of living your life like you were never told what it is, you were just shown what it is. If nobody ever said the words I love you or I love this, and you had no idea what it meant, but you lived life feeling this without knowing what it is. Because I think humans are so confused about everything because life is confusing, especially these days. I mean, it always has been. It's always been confusing, and it's confused people failing upwards, being confused until they kind of figure something out, which starts a revolution or an invention or something, and then here we are. So I think defining things has become so important. But in reality, I don't know if it is. Like, when you think about it, the definition of things helps with explaining it to somebody, but in terms of emotions, I think just stripping it down to what they feel like, that pure sort of energetic form, and learning how to accept that for what it is, cherishing good emotions, nurturing those, dealing with the bad, identifying the bad, and the sort of link between events and bad emotions, which I know therapy is there for, and I'm an advocate of. I went to therapy for a while, but I wonder, just out of curiosity, how it would be if we were taught how to let things flow as opposed to adding labels and definitions on things. And it's just something that kind of fascinated me, that oddly I link with that idea. So yeah, there's that, if anybody is interested. But this is just experimenting and trying to have fun with this and doing things. I know since I've started doing the podcast, my activity on social media is pretty much none, because really all I ever posted was memes and songs I've been listening to, which lately has been a lot of Fetus, J.G. Thirlwell from Venture Bros, Hyde, and the companion album to that, Soak, are just fucking awesome. His back catalog is great too, but it's vastly different. He's one of the ones that if you listen to the first album and the last album, it barely sounds like the same artist anymore, but I've really been enjoying that. I've really been enjoying Frank Zappa. I bought Overnight Sensation from the Vinyl Frontier, which led to me wanting to listen to the Live in Barcelona, which I didn't know copies of that existed, but it's not on streaming. So I was listening to the 88 Last American show, which is just a great show. Zappa's 88 band was phenomenal. I'm a huge Mike Keneally fan. And I love Zappa, although there's something about Zappa personally that he comes across very defensive and like he's attacking people with his intelligence. Not to take away from the fact that he was insanely brilliant, but I think using that in a way that undermines others is kind of a dick move. And I know apparently from what I've read, he was not an attentive dad, but somebody who released as much work as he did. I can probably imagine that. It doesn't really surprise me. But I know Mike Keneally was a part of his band around that time, who played guitar for Death Clock. He played keyboards at Mastodon. He's played with Dev. He's just an awesome guy. He's like kind-hearted Frank Zappa to me is what I would equate that to. So yeah, just that's kind of been my listening habits primarily for the past little bit. A lot of Fetus, but yeah, that has my ability to wrap my head around what he does sort of melodically is not there. So I had an idea that was quote unquote inspired by that sort of style that he's kind of adopted over the years. Not so much the early stuff, but the later stuff. Although I know with City by Strapping Young Lad, he cited Fetus as an influence for that, like Fetus and Cop Shoot Cop, that kind of very sleazy noir type industrial grunge, I guess you would call it. It has had a spot for me, and it's hit a spot. So that's kind of what I've been doing. I hope everybody is taking care, drinking water, taking vitamins, whatever you got to do. So anyway, that's my episode for the week. Enjoy.